start tonight, I'd like to introduce Mayor Steve Tate, who's been a developmental asset champion for over 10 years now in Morgan Hill. And so I thought it'd be very nice for him as one of the co-sponsors to come up and say a few words to us. So, Mayor Tate.
Thank you very much, Wes. It's just, I'm really excited about being here this evening. As Wes mentioned, I've been involved with assets for over 10 years. And I just wanted to give you a quick history. In 1998, we had a program at Rotary. And it was Dean Shokes from the YMCA, and she was talking about these 40 developmental assets, and somehow the light bulb in my head went off when I heard the presentation that she gave, and I wanted to get involved in that. And she talked about a new organization that was being formed in San Jose called Project Cornerstone. And so I went to some kind of a meeting. I forget exactly what kind of a meeting it was about Project Cornerstone, and kind of signed up, found out that Mayor Dennis Kennedy had already signed up, but was already involved. And so came back, talked to Mayor Kennedy, and we initiated a process whereby in June of 2001, which will be 10 years ago next month, we adopted as a framework for everything we do for youth, the 40 developmental assets on behalf of the city of Morgan Hill. Worked for years and years, worked with Mary Patterson, worked with Akemi, worked with Ann. Formed an organization here in Morgan Hill called YES, which was short for Youth Empowered for Success. Got the word out fairly widespread, but never really had the full support of the school district. And now guess what's happened? The school district is totally on board. They've adopted it as well as us. Clay's here today to present to the community, and we're going to build and build and build on that for our youth programs. So I'm very delighted that he's here this evening, and it's just going forward, and I'm excited about it. Thank you.
And Linda DeSilvius couldn't be here tonight. She's not feeling well with Project Cornerstone. Mary, do you want to say anything on behalf of Project Cornerstone?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say welcome, and Project Cornerstone's still going full bore. An informal assistant at Project Cornerstone. I want to welcome everybody. Thank you, Claire Roberts, for being here. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks to Project Cornerstone, by the way, for being leaders in this county in this effort. And then speaking of the county Board of Education, the Office of Education, they have their representatives here. We have to really give them credit for bringing Clay this way. They have an all-day function tomorrow for educators, and we said, hey, can we piggyback that and borrow Clay in the evening? And so they were gracious enough to work with us on that. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it along to Chuck also. Let me read about Clay a little bit, and then I'll tell you a story of Clay, and give the mic to Clay and let him do the work that he came to do tonight, and the reason you're all here. He started, or at least began, part of his career as a health education teacher in Jason Lee Junior High School in Tacoma, Washington. He was administrative intern in drug education for Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction in Olympia, Washington. He was a health education coordinator in the Educational Service District number 121 in Seattle, Washington. He was the Chief Executive Officer, Comprehensive Health Education Foundation out of Seattle, Washington, and founder and president of Robertson Associates in Bainbridge Island, Washington. He's been a consultant in over 40 states and 6 foreign countries, including the following agencies and groups: Alcohol, Drug Abuse, and Mental Health Administration, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, U.S. Department of Justice, Indian Health Service, National Cancer Institute, Disney Channel, which my kids will be happy to hear that, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and American Medical Association. He got his master's from the University of Oregon, only because he couldn't get into USC, it's not his fault. And he got his BA from Central Washington State. Some of the awards that Clay has received or been recognized for: he's been the keynote presenter at over 700 international, national, regional, state, and local community events. Been on the Today Show on NBC as a prevention expert. Received a leadership award from the Comprehensive Health Education Foundation. His programs have been highlighted in Instructor Magazine, News and World Report, Newsweek, Good Housekeeping, and Our Magazine, PBS Frontline, and PBS nationally televised special, It Shouldn't Hurt to Be a Kid. His publications include, and there are many of them, Titles like Building Developmental Assets in Schools and Communities, Great Places to Learn, How Asset Building Schools Help Students Succeed, Get Real about Violence, Violence Prevention Curriculum for Grades K through 9, and Here's Looking at You 2000, Drug Education Curriculum for Grades K through 12. There are many other things I could read about Clay, but the reason why I'm excited to have Clay here tonight is 7 years ago I was a principal of a middle school that was the lowest performing middle school in our county. It was known as the gang school. Anderson, California is a different interpretation of what a gang is, so we would all probably laugh at that, but that's what they were considered. That was a reputation. We heard about Clay and we brought him in. He helped us build assets in our youth. Building those assets helped us create a better school. 2 years later, we were a California Distinguished School. That school is now doing very, very well, and I think a lot of it has to do with the work of Clay Roberts, the Search Institute, and people all over the country that are trying to build assets in our youth. So without further ado, Clay Roberts, thank you for being here, and we'll give the mic to you.
Thanks, Wes. That's one of those introductions that you wish your mom and dad were here to appreciate. They are never here at the right time. And what I will say, being a graduate of the University of Oregon, the question is USC still an accredited university? I'm not sure about that. No, and you know, it's interesting to hear Wes give the asset work credit for what happened in Anderson. I would give Wes credit for what happened in Anderson. I think turnarounds happen because of people, and I think my job's easy tonight. It's follow-through that's really the hard part. So nice to be here. It's really nice to be here in Morgan Hill, and you don't know why. Brenda, who is with the county office, Brenda, are you in the back? Can you wave? Because we talked about the county office. We're doing a workshop together tomorrow, and she has great timing. So I have been down here for a couple days, and my daughter lives in San Bruno, so I had a chance to see her. My sister lives in Pacific Grove. I'm a cyclist, so I got to ride parts of 2 stages of the Tour of California over the last 2 days. I can tell you that those guys are really incredible when you try and climb Sierra Road yesterday at 3.5 miles of 9.4% grade. I got a real sense of what those guys are doing. So it's been really fun to be down here. I probably also should tell you the reason I said it's really nice to be here. I got up this morning, I looked in the mirror, and I looked bad, so I washed my face, and I thought things would get better, and they didn't. You know, so I'm thinking, what's going on here? And then I kind of went through the last 4 years. Here's my last 4 years in review. 4 years ago, I went in for an annual physical to find that I had a 90% blockage in my left main coronary artery, so we did bypass surgery. And the next year, I went in for my annual physical to find that both of my bypass grafts had failed, and so they had to do a double-barrel stent in my left main, which isn't something they like to do. And last year, I went in for my annual physical to find that scarring had developed over my stents, so we had to do angioplasty. When I said I'm really glad to be here today, you don't really understand. I'm really glad to be anywhere. You know? And I'm not saying that for sympathy. Actually, I'm saying that for 2 reasons. If you have a family history of heart disease, I want you to go out and get checked, because I've had very few symptoms, and I got to believe there are other people in this room who have the same problem, and you don't know it yet. So that may be the most important message this evening. The other reason I'm telling you this is it explains some of the bizarre behavior you see up here tonight. First of all, they have me on niacin right now. I'm having hot flashes. Some of you in this room are going, been there, done that. But for me, this is a new experience. And I used to have sympathy for my wife. I now have empathy. It's a whole different deal, okay? The second thing, when they do the surgery, they put you on a heart-lung machine and they stop your heart and then they restart you. And when they do that, there are memory problems and there are emotional stuff connected with this, which I have been experiencing both of those. So I want to apologize ahead of time to Wes. I may not remember all of what you told me to do here this evening, but they put you on this drug that changes you from a type A to a type B personality. So I may not remember, but I don't give a rip. Which is really an interesting way to live your life. I have some of those drugs along with me if anybody needs them this evening. So let me just, and it was a very nice introduction, but let me just tell you tonight, I'm not going to talk from a professional standpoint. I want to talk from the standpoint of a parent. We have 2 daughters, and let me just tell you about my girls for just a second. Amy is on the left. Amy graduated from Santa Clara University and has a master's degree from Lewis and Clark. She's a second grade teacher, or was up until this last year, in Portland, Oregon. She now has her own online business because she has, we have 2 grandsons, and she's the mother of these 2 great little boys. And so she decided to be a stay-at-home mom, so she has her own online business and operates that out of her home. Emily, on the right, lives in San Bruno. She just graduated with dual master's degrees from Berkeley. And she just spent this last year 3 months in Bangladesh working with Mohammed Yunus, who is, some of you may know that name, who does microloans to Muslim women below the poverty line, and she was looking at the public health implications of that work. She is a volunteer at Oakland Children's Hospital working with parents who've lost a child, and she works for First Five here in California. Those are my girls. Now, I could have told you that Emily has a temper like her dad. I could have told you that Amy is never on time. I could have told you what was wrong with my kids. Instead, I chose to talk about what was right with my girls. Here's the first message this evening. You will do more to shape and change your children's behavior by focusing on what's right, not what's wrong with them. Okay? And the model we're going to look at tonight really does that. See, here's what we've done in America, and it drives me nuts. We look at the kids who don't make it. We look at the kids who use drugs. We look at the kids who are violent. We look at the kids who drop out of school early, and we ask, what went wrong here, and how can we fix them? And you know, that's an important question, but it's my contention. If you only look at the kids who don't make it, you come up with a skewed view of the world. There's another group of young people who we need to pay attention to. Who are they? Yeah, you need to look at the kids who are doing well, and you need to ask, what went right here? And then you need to ask the question, I'm not suggesting that you ignore the kids who are struggling, but I'm suggesting you will learn more by looking at the kids who are doing well and asking what went right here. And then how do we make that happen more consistently, more often for all of our kids? Actually, there's a third group of young people who are the most interesting kids to look at. They are the children who come from adversity and make it in spite of that adversity. How many of you know one of those incredibly resilient kids? You know, their family life may be a mess. They're the kids, and I think it's really important that we remind ourselves this evening as we get started. You have 13-year-olds in this community who are the most responsible members of their family. They're the kids who get their younger brothers and sisters up and get them ready for school each day. They're the kids who make sure their younger brothers and sisters have done their homework, that they've had something for breakfast, and they get them out the door. You know, if we could understand more about what works with those children, I think we would be in a much better position to help all of our kids make it in Morgan Hill. Does that make sense to you? So tonight, I'm not going to talk about what's wrong with kids. I want to talk about what's right with them. And in that spirit, here's what I want you to do. This is going to be deadly this evening if you have to sit here and listen to me for the next 2 hours. So I believe, there's a great book out. The book is called The Wisdom of Crowds. John Selowicki is the author. And what he says, in a group this large and this diverse, the crowd is smarter than the guy up front. There's more wisdom in this room than I possess about what children need in order to succeed. In fact, you look at the collective years of parenting in this room, your own experience growing up, and many of you work professionally with young people. I happen to believe there's a whole lot more wisdom in this room than I possess. So here's what I want to do. I want to tap your collective wisdom for just a second. And the first thing I want you to do is I want you to turn around and with somebody you don't know, just real quickly. And I want you to take just a moment to talk about, how many of you are parents here this evening? Or grandparents? Okay. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just a moment to turn around with somebody who you really don't know in this room and talk for just a moment about your children or your grandchildren or a kid that you love and care about if you don't have children. And I want you to talk about what's right with them. Because that's the direction we're going to head this evening. And in order to get you involved and get you to know some of the people in this room, you need to take a bit of a risk, turn around, face somebody behind you, beside you, somebody you don't know, and introduce yourself first, and then for just a moment tell them about your children and tell them something that's right with them, not what's wrong with them. Everybody got it? Go. You got 3 minutes to do this. Go. So, when you hear the train whistle this evening, it's time to thank your partner. And if I can get you to turn back around here. Thank you for doing that. So, the first thing, again, tonight I want you to think about is I want you to think about what's right with kids in Morgan Hill, not what's wrong with them. And I think you will do more to shape and change behaviors of young people in Morgan Hill by focusing on what's right. The second, program designer and developer, and you may have picked that up from Wes's comments. I've developed 5 national model programs with my team, and those programs are used widely throughout the state of California and throughout the United States. I made the mistake of looking at these. These are curriculum programs mostly for school districts. And I made the mistake of going out and looking at these programs in action, and here's what I found. Thousands of school districts have purchased our program. Very few are actually using them. That's the first thing I found, which was disappointing. The second thing I found, teachers would say, hey, come into the classroom, we're using your program. And you'd walk into their classroom and you'd watch what they were doing. And what they were doing didn't look like what we had written. There wasn't a lot of fidelity between what we actually wrote and what actually happened with young people, which was also disappointing. But where we saw things that really touched the lives of children, it really made a difference, it had very little to do with the program. It had everything to do with who delivered the program. You see, I think we have lost sight about what really makes a difference in the lives of children. I don't think it's programs, I think it's people. I think it's the people in this room that make a difference for kids in Morgan Hill every day. So tonight, I don't want to talk about programs. I want to talk about people. And the fact that we have a number of parents here in the audience, when we talk about the people that are important in the lives of children, the single best predictor of whether children make it or not is whether they come from strong, loving, and supportive families. Those of you who are parents here this evening, you're the best predictor of whether your children are going to make it. Not the school system, not the Parks and Recreation Department, although they have a role. It's families are the most important when we talk about successful children. So tonight, we're not going to talk about what's wrong. We're going to talk about what's right. We're not going to talk about programs. We're going to talk about people. And if you think tonight that we're going to present to you another program to implement in this community, I just want to correct that. I don't think we're talking about creating or implementing a new program in this community. In fact, how many of you came here tonight representing organizations or agencies within Morgan Hill? Let's just see a show of hands. Many of you represent organizations that have programs for young people, right, and families. Here's what I can tell you. How many of you came here tonight hoping for one more new program? You're just one program short this year. See, I happen to believe, especially in this economy, especially in California, your plates are really full. And people are really good at telling you what to put on your plate. They never tell you what to take off the plate. Did you notice that? Tonight, I don't want to talk about another program. I don't think you need another program. I think there are already some really good programs that are here in this community for young people. I think it's about getting more out of those programs. So tonight, I don't want to talk about programs. I want to talk about creating a movement in Morgan Hill, a different way of engaging young people, a different way of interacting with young people, a different way of valuing young people in this community, okay? And in order to do that, I want to present a model. But everyone should have picked up a buff-colored, multi-page brochure. It's available in English and in Spanish in the back of the room. And if you don't have one, if you would raise your hand, I'm sure someone in the back of the room can get you a copy because I want everybody to have a copy. So if you don't have one, raise your hand. We'll get you one, okay? If you would turn just one page in this brochure, you're going to see a list entitled Developmental Assets. Everybody find that? Okay? How many of you know this list already? Some of you do. Many of you don't. So for some of you, this may be a bit of review, but the research, I want to share a bit of research with you this evening. And that research comes from Search Institute. Search is a research institute out of Minneapolis, Minnesota that has been looking at healthy, successful kids for over 50 years. They've been trying to figure out what young people need in order to succeed. They call these things developmental assets. I have to tell you, first of all, I'm not their employee. I don't work for them. I came across their work and my work with young people. It made perfect sense to me. I'll tell you where I agree with them and where I disagree with them. And the first area that I disagree with them on is I don't like the term developmental assets. It doesn't communicate. It's not easy. It doesn't roll off your tongue, first of all. It is not easy to say, and it doesn't communicate as clearly as I would like it. I want you to think of these as the fundamental building blocks that young people need in order to succeed. Okay? Look at this list for a second. Look at number 3 on the list. Who have 3 or more adults in their life, in addition to their parents, who spend time with them, who encourage them, and who call them on things when they're doing things that are inappropriate. Those kids do better. They do better academically. How many of you believe that? That's what the research says. And interestingly enough, they are less likely to be involved in drug use or violent behavior if they have those 3 other adults in their life in addition to their parents. Anybody believe that one? Yeah. Look at number 9 on this list. Young people who spend an hour a week in community service, giving back to the communities in which they live. They're not just takers, they're givers. Those kids are much, much less likely to be involved in gang activity. How many of you believe that? They also do much better academically, interestingly enough. Look at 11, 12, and 13 on this list. Kids who have boundaries, family boundaries, school boundaries, and community boundaries are really important to the healthy development of children. Do you believe that one? You can help me out with this one. How many of you, as a young person growing up, knew where the line was? How many knew when you crossed it? How many knew what would happen when you crossed it? It's not as clear for many young people today, but boundaries are really important to the healthy development of children. Colin Powell talks about growing up. He said, there wasn't an internet in my neighborhood growing up. He said, there was an anti-net. A group of women who really weren't related to you, but they acted like they were your aunties. And if they saw you doing something appropriate, it was likely to say, I'm really proud of you for what you just did. And if they saw you doing something that was inappropriate, it was likely they would call you personally on that, and they would call your parents. You see, the anti-net doesn't exist in our communities anymore. Okay? The internet does, the anti-net doesn't. Okay? Look at 16 on this list. Young people who have somebody in their life who expects a lot from them, they do much better. Again, you can help me with this. How many of you, as a kid growing up, had somebody in your life who expected a lot from you? How many of you tried to meet those expectations? How many of you are still trying to meet those expectations? Seriously, how many of you do things the way you do them? Because that's what those people expected of us. And even though they may be dead and gone or no longer in our lives, if they can see us doing our work, and maybe they can, we would want them to be proud of the way we do our work. Anybody believe that one? Yeah. I love this list. You know why? There's a lot of rhetoric around the fact that it takes a village to raise a child, and I do believe it takes a village. But you know what? No one ever talks about what the village needs to look like. For the first time on one sheet of paper, each of the items research-based. This is a picture of what the village of Morgan Hill needs to look like. If you're serious, really serious about raising healthy, successful, academically successful, healthy kids. Does that make sense? How many of you are going down this list right now and mentally checking off what your own children would say they have in their life? Anybody doing that one right now? See, when I first saw this, our daughters were teenagers. So I mentally went down this list and I checked off what I thought my girls would say we had. I took it home that evening. I made copies for both of them. I gave them each a copy at the dinner table. I asked them to go down the list and check off which of these they thought we had in our family. If you're thinking about doing this, I just want to prepare you. They didn't answer it correctly. And I got really defensive. And, I was saying things like, how can you say you don't have that? Come on. And it didn't go really well until I stopped being defensive and I just started listening. And when I started listening, here's what I learned. My daughter's perception was their reality. Whether I agreed with them or not wasn't important. If I thought we were doing a terrific job and my girls didn't see it, what it said to me is maybe we better do it differently at our house. Does that make sense to you? Okay? But here, again, don't take my word for it. Here's what I want you to do. As a parent, and because tonight we want to make sure that we're speaking to parents and community people in this audience, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down this list, and if you don't have a pen or a pencil, Brenda, we have some in the back, right? So you can raise your hand. Here's what I want you to do. Go down this list, and I'd like you to put a check mark beside those assets that you think you do in your family reasonably well, okay? I want you to circle the 2 or 3 that you do really well, okay? Because some are going to say, I think we do a really nice job of that in our family. Others you can put a check mark beside, but circle the 2 or 3 that you do really well. And I want you to underline the 2 or 3 that you'd like to do just a little better. If tonight is going to make any difference, backtrack here for just a second. I was at a national conference a few years ago. 17-year-old young man from Canada was the keynote speaker. An amazing kid. This young man has formed an international organization that is the equivalent of Save the Children internationally. He engages high school students, mostly in third world countries, and he gets them involved in the lives of younger kids to make their lives better. And when he spoke, and if you can imagine being 17 years old, speaking to a group of 3,000 adults in the audience, this is an amazing kid. He quoted Stokely Carmichael. He said, "Don't tell me what you believe." He said, "Tell me what you do, and I'll tell you what you believe." It's not what you know that makes a difference, and it's not what you believe that makes a difference. It's what you do that makes a difference. So if tonight makes any difference in this community, it'll be because you do something a little differently, okay? So I want to challenge you. Look at this list. Go down the list and put a check mark beside the things that you do with your children. Circle the 2 or 3 that you do really well. Underline the 2 or 3 that you would like to do a little better. It's about getting better, okay? Take just a moment to do that. And you need to do step 1 in order to do step 2. There is a step 2, okay? Now, that means thank your partner. Come on back together. How many of you, first of all, thank you for doing this. How many of you were able to find some things on this list that you think you do pretty well with your kids? Okay, good. And here's what I happen to believe. Tonight is about challenging ourselves to move from good to great. First of all, in our families, and then in our community, okay? I happen to believe that when you do this kind of thing, a lot of families who are already doing a lot of this come, okay? So, good for you. But I also want to remind you, we can get better at what we do. And there's a difference between good and great. And what I think is sometimes good is the enemy of great. When you think you're good, people are less likely to take that next step to be great. So I want to challenge you to think about how you can do this with your own children. And really, as you think about this evening, I want you to think about the kids that your kids hang out with. This isn't just about doing it with your kids. It's about doing it with your neighbors. It's about doing it with the friends that they hang around with. You want to make this a better community? You can dramatically increase the odds if you spend time in the lives of the kids that your kids hang around with. Okay? It's not just about taking care of your own. It's about taking care of all the kids. Okay? Now, how many of you found things on this list that you thought were really important? How many found things on this list that made a difference for you as a kid growing up? Okay? So here's the first thing. I love this list. Actually, before we do that, what are some of the things on this list that you talked about that were really important?
Other adult relationships.
Yeah, other adult relationships. How many of you as a kid growing up had somebody other than an immediate family member in your life, somebody who made a difference for you? Okay? Yeah. For me, it was Mrs. McClellan, my 7th grade social studies teacher, who took me outside of her class one day. No other kids around, and she said, "You know what? I've seen your IQ test." She said, "You're really bright." She said, "You're not working up to your potential. I'm going to expect more of you than I expect of other kids." I worked incredibly hard for her that year. And then it occurred to me about 2 years later, we never took IQ tests. I have 4 brothers and sisters who all went to the same school. None of us, in fact, I was with my sister Mary today in Pacific Grove, and she said, "We never took IQ tests." And I said, "I know." And then, I still remember walking back into class feeling sorry for the poor dumb kids in my class because I was so smart. And to this day, I'm still wondering, how many kids did she take outside her classroom and tell them the same thing she told me? Okay. So other adults made a difference. What else did you talk about? What are some of the other things that you think really make a difference? Yes?
Parent involvement in school.
Absolutely. Parent involvement in school and parent involvement in the lives of our kids. You're the best predictor of whether your children are going to make it or not the school system. You are the best predictor, all right? What else did you talk about that was really important? Yes?
High expectations.
Yeah, high expectations, very high expectations. And kids will rise to those expectations. And what we find where kids who are struggling, it's because no one in their life expects much from them at all. So yes, high expectations are really important for kids. What else?
Service to the community.
Yeah, service to the community. And how many of you as a kid growing up gave back to your community in some way? Yeah. And it's really important that our kids learn that lesson early on, okay? Anything else?
Positive communication.
Yeah, positive communication. If you'll notice these assets, this is a great one to bring up. Notice this list again. Look at this list. Notice there are percentages out in the right-hand column. Search Institute has surveyed 3.5 million kids. And although we don't have Cornerstone staff here tonight, you have some data from Morgan Hill about your kids. I don't have that data, so somebody may have that data, but these are the percentage of kids nationally who say they have these assets in their life. And this isn't a survey where the kids go down the list and just check off. Do you have love and support for your parents? Check. It's a 156-item questionnaire. Kids have multiple questions about what's going on in their family. Based on their responses to those questions, they're either judged to have that asset or not have that asset. It's a pretty sophisticated instrument. And here's what I can tell you. Look at these numbers. As parents, we're always concerned about how our kids do on the report card. This is our report card from our kids. You want to know how we're doing as a community or how we're doing as a nation? This is your report card. Look at the first item. 68% of kids nationally say they have high levels of love and support in their family. Everybody see that? But look at the second one. What percentage of kids say they can talk with their parents about the things that are really important? Less than a third. So is family communication important? Absolutely. And what I can tell you is if Morgan Hill is an average community, less than a third of your kids say they can talk with their parents about the things that are really important. By the way, this survey is done with 6th graders through 12th graders. All right? So there's a lot of room for improvement there. Okay? Anything else that you talked about that's really important?
Youth as resource. Youth as resources.
Youth as resources. Yeah, it's really interesting to me that in many of our communities we sit young people on the sidelines. And we say, when you become an adult, you can do some really important things in this world. Now, I happen to believe, who's the most powerful messenger if you're trying to reach a 6th grader? It's an 8th grader. They model about 2 years up in their behavior. And when our 8th graders work to build these assets with our 6th graders, who learns the most in that process? Yeah, the research says the 8th graders actually gain more than the 6th graders, but they both gain from that experience. Why would we sit, especially in these tough times economically, where we are so strapped for help, why would we sit our kids on the sideline when they have tremendous potential to make this community a better place for everybody? And what I will tell you, you want to read another interesting book, and I'm just going to throw these things out this evening, The Primal Teen by Barbara Strauch. Barbara Strauch is the science editor for the New York Times. This is a study of teenage brain research. And what it says is, if you understand how they do this, they expose teens and adults to the same stimuli, and with MRI technology, they monitor what centers of the brain are active and what centers are communicating with other centers. I hear a lot of adults making judgments about teenagers. What was he thinking? Well, here's what I can tell you. He wasn't thinking the way you're thinking. What I can tell you is their frontal lobe, which controls reason and judgment, is not well developed nor well connected with other centers of the brain. Their consequential thinking is not good. And how many of us, you don't have to tell me what you did, but how many of you made some bad choices when you were 15, 16, 17, 18 years of age? You don't have to tell me what they were. But I see some of those same adults making real harsh judgments about kids. Yes, I want you to have high expectations. I want you to understand their consequential thinking is not good. And if you want to help them, what you need to do is function as their frontal lobe for a while they develop one. You need to think out loud for them. You need to do a lot of consequential thinking in front of kids so they understand what that looks like. But what I can tell you is their brains are larger than our brains. Their creative centers are incredibly active, better than our creative centers. Some of the best authors, some of the best artists, some of the best musicians did some of their best work when they were very, very young. Okay? If we were smart, if we were really smart, we would use the best of the young people's talents in our community. We would use their creative talents along with our good consequential thinking to make Morgan Hill a better place for everybody. But instead, we sit our kids on the sideline. Doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? What else did you talk about? Anything else that was really important? Yes?
Youth programs, in particular sports or after-school arts, things that get kids together to form social bonds with other kids in school that they wouldn't normally associate with, perhaps.
Absolutely. And here's what the research... How many of you, just to help me out here for a second, how many of you as a young person growing up had something that lit you up, turned you on, and kept you focused? Art, music, dance, drama, sports, clubs of some kind. How many of you had something that really kept you focused and really expanded those social networks that you had at school? You know what? And the research says it makes a difference. In fact, what the research says is kids do better academically when they are in their activity. If they're in the senior play and they're rehearsing for the senior play, their grades are actually better during that time than when they are not in the senior play.
We talked about that same thing, and I mentioned time management, something that kids are poor at. I actually had better control over my homework and doing it when I had less time to pick when I did it.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting stuff, but I think that we forget about this. And what's the first thing to go when the budget gets cut in our schools? Some of those programs for the arts and sports and clubs get cut. Bad strategy, but in tough time when you got to make tough choices, all right? So, here's what I want you to know. I wanted you to be familiar with this model. I think this is a great starting point, but the first thing I want you to know, again, here's where I disagree with Search Institute. The list is not, and in fact, they would agree with me on this, the list is not complete. Everything that the kids need is not on this list. Let me just tell you some obvious things that are missing from this list from my perspective. There's nothing about physical health on this list. Nutrition, exercise, we know those make a difference for our kids. The research is very clear, not on the list. Work ethic isn't on the list. I happen to believe children who work hard do better than the kids who don't. Anybody else believe that one's true? Sense of humor is not on the list. I don't have a lot of research that supports this, but I happen to believe that kids who can laugh at themselves do better than the kids who don't. Anybody else think that's true? I asked a group of kids recently, high school age young people, what's missing from this list? You know what they told me? Pets. And when they said that, this young man who said it, he started laughing. I said, why do you think that's important? He said, well, my dog loves me no matter what I do. So here's what I want you to think about. This evening's session is about becoming the person that your dog thinks you are. Because if you were as good as your dog thinks you are, you would be better for your family, okay? So, although I love this list, the list is not complete, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in this room, and you can add to this list. I think it's a great starting point, but I also believe there are things that could be added to this list that really make a difference, and we know they make a difference for our kids. So, good starting place, but I want you to think a little more broadly about this. Now, I also want you to know why this is so important. So turn to the next page. You're going to see a series of bar graphs. And before we do this, I asked a group of young people. I live on Bainbridge Island, Washington, west of Seattle. We have great schools, and we did the survey with our kids. And if you look at asset number 5, turn back that list of assets. What percentage of kids say they go to school in a caring school climate? Because there are a number of school people in this audience. Less than a third, 28%, okay? Or 29%. So I asked, in my community, they were concerned about that, and the teachers wouldn't believe this data when we did the survey because we have great schools and only 32% of our kids say they go to school in a caring school climate. So I'm doing a focus group. I got 20 high school kids sitting in a circle. I have the staff from the high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, all the faculty members, on the outside looking in like a fishbowl. And I'm asking these 20 kids why that number is so low. See, these numbers don't tell you what the kids are really trying to say. It's the dialogue that begins to illuminate this. When I asked them why that school climate number was so low, the first kid said, our elementary experiences were a whole lot more asset-rich than our secondary experiences. The teachers cared about us as people at the elementary grades. They care about their subject matter at the high school. That was the kid's perception, okay? I never thought of that. The second kid said, you know why that number is so low? He said, because school climate isn't just about how adults treat us here, it's about how kids treat each other. And he said, and at the middle school level, kids pick on each other a lot. That's why that number is so low. I wouldn't have thought of that. The kids brought that to our attention. It's the dialogue that's really important as you do this work. The third kid, really courageous young lady, said, I have 3 great classes in the morning and then I have to go to 4th period. I hate to come to school because of 4th period. This guy dumps on kids every day, and if you were serious about this, you wouldn't let him teach here. Now the faculty's on the outside looking in, and everybody knows who she's talking about, and he knows she's talking about him because he knows she's in his 4th period class. And the tension, you can just feel it in the air. I'm trying to diffuse this. So I said, why do you think some adults do this in your life and others don't? The kids get it right away. You know what the first kid said? He said, I think the adults that don't do this, they don't do it because no one ever did it for them as a kid growing up. They don't know how. Another kid said, hard to fill us up if you're not full. So we came up with a new strategy that morning. Here's our strategy. Feed the adults so they don't eat the kids. I'm absolutely serious. You want to make this a better community? Take better care of one another. Support each other as parents and families. That's what this is going to take. You can't do this alone. Okay? You need to be real supportive and helpful and help each other. It will not happen just because you're doing it with your kids. In fact, if you look at this list of assets for a second. Is this a list of what children need? Yeah, I think it's a list of what human beings need. How many of you still need love and support in your life? Good, almost a third of you. Morgan Hill's different, I know. Okay. So how many of you still need positive communication between your neighbors and your friends and your kids' school and family members? Yeah. How many of you still want positive role models that you can look up to and believe in these tough times that face our nation ahead? This is not a list of what children need. This is a list of what human beings need. The other thing I want you to understand is don't make the mistake of equating developmental assets with economic assets, because they don't necessarily line up. Let me just tell you what I'm talking about. I did a workshop in the Montebello School District, East Los Angeles. Came back, did a second workshop. I asked them, what have you learned and what have you done? A woman in the audience, her name is Jasmine. She's an elementary counselor. She said, I want to tell you what I've learned. But she said, first I want to tell you about my family. She said, there are 9 kids in my family. She said, my brother's a physician, my sister's a school principal, I'm a counselor. She went down this list of 9 incredibly accomplished kids. She said, I want to tell you about my parents for a moment. She said, my parents moved here from El Salvador when we were very young. She said, my dad has the equivalent of a 4th grade education in Spanish. My mom has the equivalent of an 8th grade education. She said, my parents worked all kinds of jobs to support our family growing up. She said, we always get together at Christmas time at my parents' house and we marvel at what an accomplished family we've become. And the question was always, how did that happen? She said, I knew the answer when I saw this list. She said, I had over 30 of these. So this year, she said at Christmas, I made copies for my brothers and sisters. I had them go down the list and check off how many of these they thought we had in our family. And she said, we all agreed we had over 30. So the first thing we did is we thanked our parents. She said, the second thing, we got into a really deep discussion. By most people's standards, my family was economically poor, but asset rich. She said, many of the kids that I work with today, by my family standards, they would be considered economically rich, but asset poor. Don't assume because families don't have a lot of money that they necessarily have low levels of assets, and don't assume because parents have some wealth that their kids necessarily have high levels of assets. What I want to point out is you can't buy what's on this list. It is not for sale. This is about spending time with our kids. This is about meaningful relationships with our kids. You can't buy this stuff. It's not for sale. Okay? So don't assume because some of your families are struggling economically that they necessarily don't have this. And others, because they've got some wealth, are going to do just fine with it. Everybody got that? Now, turn to these bar graphs. Here's what's really important. The number of assets, as you went down and checked off which of these things you did in your family, if you counted them up, and I asked you to count up how many you really did on a regular basis with your kids, here's what I can tell you. The average young person in America has 19 of these assets in their life. 19. And I don't know, I can't remember, Santa Clara County average, do you remember, Brenda? But it's a little bit higher, and I can't remember the exact number. I want to say 20 or 21. But here's what I can tell you. Notice, look at the bottom set of bar graphs. The third one over from the left, it's labeled illicit drug use. Everybody see that one? Up here on my screen, it's represented by the light blue bars. The average kid in America has 19 of these, and close to that in Santa Clara County, and you might wonder what difference does it make. Here's the difference. Kids who have between 0 and 10 assets, no more than 10, 38% of them are involved in illicit drug use. But those kids who have just 10 more, between 11 and 20, look what happens. Drug use drops from 38%. It drops to 18%. It drops by more than half as assets increase by 10. And those young people who have, come on, Arrow, between 21 and 30, it drops again from 18% to 6%. And those young people who have over 30, only 1% were engaged in illicit drug use. That's a huge difference, 38% to 1%. Look at all of the bottom bar graphs. I want you to just pay attention to those for a second. Here's why I want you to do this. By building assets for your children, you can dramatically decrease high-risk behaviors. And as important as that is, and I know many of you are concerned with your children and you want them to grow up safe and drug-free. I have 2 daughters, don't get me wrong. I want them to be safe and drug-free, and I wanted that when they were growing up. But when you think about what you want for them when they become young adults, what do they look like at age 25 or 30 if we've done a terrific job as a community and as a family and as a school system? I know kids who are 25 years old who are safe and drug-free, sitting on their butts at home doing nothing. That's not my definition of success, the absence of disease. Look at the top set of bar graphs. Things like success in school, maintaining good health, valuing diversity, giving back to their communities. Here's what I want to point out to you. The reason I want you to do this, by building assets, you get 2 for 1. You get higher levels of thriving on the part of your children, and you get lower levels of high-risk behavior. It's really important that you get both, all right? So, here's what I thought we'd do for the rest of the evening, and we're going to take about the next hour. I want to talk about how do you do this. First of all, how do you do this individually with your families and your children? And then how do you do it community-wide? And we're going to try and do that all in an hour, all right? So the first thing, because we have a lot of parents here this evening and grandparents, the first thing I want to talk about is how do you build these assets? And it's all about relationships with your children, all right? It's all about having a strong relationship. And here's what I know. Many of you have experienced this already. As kids grow and mature, it's a normal part of growth and development for them to push away and assert their independence. For some of you, this is a tough time because you're trying to stay close to your kids, and at the same time, they're trying to push away from you. And it doesn't feel great. I want to remind you, many of you did the same thing when you were 15 and 16 years old. Don't take this personally. This is about normal part of growth and development. But they still need you, and they need you desperately right now, so don't give up on this, all right? How do you stay close to them, all right? So I just want to give you a few strategies for doing that. The first is, first thing I would ask you is, do you know their love language? Do you know what I'm talking about? Some of you do and some of you don't. There's a couple authors, their names are Campbell and Chapman, and they have a series of books out on love languages. Most of their work was done with couples on marriage retreats, and they found that couples had problems in their relationship if they didn't speak the same love language. If you're a toucher and your spouse is not, you're thinking, I'm such a good guy. I remember every anniversary, I give her nice gifts, I take her nice places. I publicly affirm what a wonderful person she is. And she's thinking, if he really loved me, he'd just be a little more affectionate. Is this making sense? You don't have to raise your hand if this is your relationship. I don't need to know that tonight, okay? But I want you to understand that your children have love languages too. And if you want to build these assets, you got to stay close. So the first one I want you to think about, first love language is physical touch. These aren't in any special order. How many of you have a toucher at home? A snuggler, a cuddler? Our youngest daughter, Emily, who I just spent some time with this week, who is 32 years old, who will be getting married in July, is from the time she was little, and I'm talking about the moment she was born, she was a burrower and a snuggler and a cuddler, all right? That's Emily. And for dads in this room, I just want to say, I think many men, this is kind of like, this isn't my thing. Well, you know what? I don't care if it's your thing. Your kids, especially your boys. See, I think a lot of our boys have struggled because many of them have not had an adult male in their life who's modeled appropriate touch, who can... See, I think real men can be strong and be nurturing, and they can do both. And we need to model that for our boys, okay? Anybody see the 60 Minutes piece on delinquent elephants in Africa? I'm not making this up, okay? Actually, it's aired twice on 60 Minutes. In the Pilanesberg National Park in South Africa, they had an overpopulation of elephants. They didn't have enough food to support the elephant population. They had to move them to other areas of the park where there was more food available. They couldn't move the big bulls because they were too big, too unruly, and they didn't have the technology to move the big bulls. They shot many of the big bulls. They moved the young juveniles. Now they had, elephants are pack animals led by males. Now they had young juvenile males leading the pack. This had never happened before. That's not the way this works in the real world, in elephant society. Over a period of 2 years in that national park, 39 white rhinos were killed by gangs of elephants. These were unruly packs led by juvenile males. Gangs, if you will. Okay? Over the next couple of years, they figured out they built trucks specifically to move the big bulls. They figured out how to tranquilize them. They were able to get them into these trucks and move them to other areas of the park. And as soon as they moved the big bulls, the killing immediately stopped. What was missing is there weren't big bull elephants to model appropriate elephant behavior for little bulls. I need them in this room to be big bull elephants for your boys and for the neighbors and for kids on your block, okay? The second strategy, how many of you know kids who love words of affirmation? You say something positive to your child and they light up, they're almost transparent, okay? And as you think about this evening, I want you to think about spoken words of affirmation and written words of affirmation. We did a project in Kansas where we developed Post-it notes that had pre-printed positive messages for children on these Post-it notes. The first one says, "I noticed something really special about you today. It is." All you have to do is complete the sentence. We asked teachers to put these on students' work when they turned them back to the kids. And what we found is the kids who love words of affirmation, they'd look at their assignment, they'd look at their grade, and then they'd throw the assignment away, but they'd pull the Post-it note off and save it in their folder. Think about written and spoken words of affirmation, okay? How many of you know the kids who want your time? How many of you have a time kid at home? And they're thinking, you're busy and they just want your time. And they're thinking, if you really love me, you give me time. Both of our girls are time kids. And from the time they were little, I would take each of them separately on a dad and daughter date together each month. Together with me, but each of them separately on these dates. And to this day, when Emily was going to get engaged over Christmas, she said, "Dad, we need to go on a date together." I mean, she's 32 years old. And I went on this date and she wanted to tell me about this man in her life. It wasn't the date I had in mind, but it's still important to her to have time. How many of you know the kids who love acts of service? You fix them their favorite meal just because it's their favorite meal, okay? You go to every performance that they're in the school play, and it runs every night for a week, but you're there to let them know how proud you are of the hard work they put in. You haven't missed a game in years. They have a problem, and you stay up late and help them noodle it out. That's an act of service. So here's what I want you to think about. If you want to stay close to your kids, you need to make sure you understand their love language, and you need to speak it often, all right? And in that spirit tonight, Brenda, if I can have you help me out, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you just do one of these really quickly so you have something to take away to do with your own kids or grandkids or the neighbor next door or a kid that you love and care about if you don't have a child. So we have some of these Post-it notes. They have pre-printed positive messages. There are 5 different messages. Here's what I want you to do. They're going to come down the aisle, take 2 or 3 of each of these Post-it notes, and I want you to complete one of them in the next 3 minutes. I want you to write a note to a young person that you love and care about, and if you don't have a young person at home anymore, to somebody that you love and care about, okay? I just want you to complete the message because I think, again, people come all the time. It's not what you know, it's what you do that makes a difference. I want you to walk away tonight with at least one positive message for somebody in your life, especially a young person in your life, that means a lot to you. Everybody got it? Take multiple copies of each of these. There are 5 different messages, all right? So you can just take them and pass them on down the line. And for the next 3 minutes, I want you to take at least one of these and complete them. Okay, as you're finishing this up, here's what I want you to do. I want you to deliver this in the next 24 hours. And I want you to surprise them with it. Put it on the mirror in the bathroom. Put it on the breakfast table in the morning on their plate. Leave it someplace where they're not expecting it. And you have multiple you can pick up extra copies here. And I think, here's what advertisers know about shaping behavior. It's consistency and redundancy of message that begins to shape and change behavior. Take extra copies. Send them notes. Drop them a note every few days or every few weeks. It's really important that they know you're thinking about them and that you know what's right with them. Again, notice these are all phrased as focusing on what's right with your children, not what's wrong with them. All right? You will do more to shape and change their behavior, and you will do more to solidify your relationship with your children by making sure that you let them know what they're doing right. Okay? That's the first thing. Here's the second strategy. I want you to engage in random acts of asset building with your kids. If you don't know what a random act of asset building looks like, tonight in the material that you picked up a brochure, and it's available in both English and in Spanish, as the Asset Approach brochure is available in English and in Spanish. 150 ways to show kids you care. This could easily be retitled, by the way, 150 ways to show people you care. But it's a great thing to stick up on the refrigerator to remind you that they're the little acts done consistently that really begin to shape and change children's behavior and send the message that you really do care about them. So if you're not understanding what that looks like, this is a random act of asset building. I did a workshop in Sacramento not too long ago with a group of teachers, and I sent them out to lunch and I asked them to engage in a random act of asset building at lunchtime and come back and report what they did. And they went out to lunch. We're coming back to the workshop. We're riding in an elevator back up to the conference room, and one of the women in the elevator said, I'm really enjoying this workshop. You're doing a terrific job. And it didn't sound real sincere, and the guy behind her said, you just did your assignment, right? Random act of asset building. So I want you to understand that a random act of asset building is different than a spontaneous act of sucking up. It needs to be thoughtful, and it needs to be genuine, and it needs to be done, and we don't do it often enough. You need to engage in random acts of asset building, okay? The third thing, I want to give you one strategy. You notice this list of assets? Turn back to your list of assets for just a second. You notice this list is divided into two categories. External assets, the kinds of things that adults do with and for children. And internal assets, the qualities that we're trying to develop in our kids, a commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, all right? So I thought I would just give you one strategy really quickly that is really important for your children to succeed. Look at asset number 35 on this list. Here's what I can tell you. Part of my teaching, I probably didn't tell you this evening, part of my background is I'm a recovering junior high school teacher. And part of my teaching career was in Reman Hall in Tacoma, which is a juvenile detention facility. My kids were incarcerated. And what I can tell you is my kids knew the difference between right and wrong. That wasn't the issue. They didn't know how to say no to their friends. Okay? My kids, and I'd ask them, why are you here? Because you knew it. Well, my friends asked me to do it, and I went along with them, and I got busted, and they didn't, and now I'm doing time. Okay? Here's what it's really important that your children know how to say no. And here's what I also want you to understand. I think it's really, you know why our kids don't know how to say no? Because most adults don't know how to say no to their friends. Why are we surprised when our children don't know how to do that? It's hard to teach your children a social skill that you don't possess. In fact, I happen to believe that many of you are here this evening because you don't know how to say no to somebody. You don't have to raise your hand. But I happen to believe that's true for some of you. You don't have to raise your hand, but I happen to believe it's true. So if you really listen closely for the next few minutes, you're going to know how to say no the next time somebody asks you to do one of these evening things and you don't want to do it, okay? So pay really close attention. And here's what we do. So here's what I want you to think about. Really quickly, how do you teach children a social skill? Because I think adults are comfortable teaching kids physical skills, they're teaching academic skills, but when we get to social skills, I see a lot of adults going, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to show you how to do this really quickly. First of all, stand up, face a partner. Anybody in this room, really quickly. Doesn't matter who they are, stand up, face a partner. You've been sitting for too long, okay? What I find is adults know how to teach a physical skill. So I'm going to have you do a physical skill because it's a lot like teaching a social skill. So here's what I want you to do. Parents, you've decided, whoever's the parent in this role play, you've decided at this time that your 5-year-old learns to open a door with a key. You can use props, you can use whatever you like, but I want you to teach your 5-year-old to open a door with a key. Those of you who are playing the role of 5-year-olds in the room, I want you to be cooperative little 5-year-olds. And I want you to watch. I want you to watch what your parent does that helps you to learn this skill, because I think you know, again, there's wisdom in this room. Really quickly, teach your 5-year-old to open a door with a key, and some of you have twins, I notice here, so teach both of them how to open a door with a key. You have 2 minutes to do that. Go. Really quickly. Do it. Stay there with your partner. Stay there with your partner. 5-year-olds, help me out here. What did your parent do that helped you in this process? They modeled it. Here's what I want you to understand. I oftentimes, because I work a lot with teachers, I use the term teacher, and some of you may be thinking this evening, I'm not a teacher. I don't happen to believe that. You may not have the title, but the most powerful way to teach children is to model. I mean, I have staff members who say to me things like, I demand respect from kids. I'm thinking, good luck. I don't think it works that way. If they had said, I model respect for children, I would have thought a lot more of them. Does that make sense? If you want your children to be respectful, model it. If you want them to be hardworking, model it. If you want them to have integrity, model it. They're watching what you do every day. So many of you, when you think about teaching a physical skill, you model it for your children. I also want you to understand, when you're talking about teaching your children social skills, it's about modeling for your children. Okay? What else did your parent do in this little role play that helped you?
Hands-on.
Hands-on, yeah. At some point, they may have modeled it for you, but at some point, they probably gave you the key and said, here, try it. And some of you, so they let you practice, and some of them did guided practice. They took your hand, and the first time they did it, they actually took you through the whole process, and then they let you do it on your own, okay? So yes, you have to you have to give them the keys at some point and let them practice it, okay? What else did they do? Talk to you in ways that 5-year-olds could understand. So if 5-year-olds don't know the difference between right and left, and they said turn, so your mom said, okay, turn the key towards the window, honey. Click. Perfect. You need to use age-appropriate language and examples for children. What else?
They were patient.
They were patient, and sometimes it's frustrating. I see a lot of adults saying things to kids like, you're not doing it right. You know what? They're not stupid, and the door isn't opening. They figured that out. That isn't helpful feedback. You need to be patient, and really helpful feedback would be to tell them exactly what they need to change in order to be successful. That's what good feedback. If they're doing well, you go, you're doing great, keep going, I'm really proud of you. But if they're having trouble and they can't even get the key in the lock, you might say something to a 5-year-old like, okay, look at the key, and it's like mountains, and the mountains need to point up. Okay, I got it. Now try it. Boom, you got success. Got it? What else did your parent do, 5-year-old? Praised. A lot of praise. A lot of positive feedback. Okay, thank your partner. I think you know what it takes to teach a social skill. Here it is. You need to motivate them. You need to break it down into small steps. Notice many of you said the first thing we do, and then the next thing we do, and then the next thing we do. Good skill training breaks it down into small steps. It models for them. Yes, you need to explain in age-appropriate ways. You need to let them practice, all right? They can only watch for so long. You need to give them feedback. You're doing great. Or, no, this time try turning it towards the window. Good job. They need to understand this skill can be used in a variety of areas of their life. Okay? That it has some transferability. If it's a key, it's not only used on the front door, it's used on the back door, on the car door, on the padlock, on the shed. You know, it works in a lot of different settings in your life. And the last is let them customize. They will say things to you like, Mom, I wouldn't say it that way, or I wouldn't do it that way. What do you say when they say that? Show me how you would do it. How many of you have seen 5-year-olds tie their shoes in some incredibly creative ways? You know what? There is more than one way to tie your shoe. I was just sharing, I have 2 grandsons. The 5-year-old, we were getting him ready for preschool the other day. He calls me Poppy. He says, Poppy, he said, underwear is like a vest for your bottom. And I said, how does that work, Alex? He said, a vest doesn't have sleeves and underwear doesn't have sleeves. So I think underwear is like a vest for your bottom. I mean, their lens is really refreshing. And you know what? I've seen 5-year-olds tie their shoes in some incredibly creative ways. I don't care if they do it my way. All I do care is, does the shoe stay tied? And can you repeat that process with fidelity? And if the answer is yes, we got success, folks. All right? Now, I'm going to take I'm going to take one skill, asset number 35, and show you how to do that really quickly. So, I'm going to need some help here. Brenda, could I get you to come down here and help? This is Brenda Carrillo from the county office, Santa Clara County Office of Education, who, by the way, is responsible for me being here this evening. She drives a hard bargain, so she said, we want you to come do a workshop on Friday. And she said, can we get some kind of discount? And I said, yeah, well, I'm willing to work with you on this. Let's talk about it. And I said, but what I would rather do, rather than discount it, is why don't you just use me more and I won't charge you anymore. So if you find a community that wants something, and she said, oh, I got this idea. We can do it in Morgan Hill. So this is the woman who's responsible for me being here this evening. I just thought, and Wes for saying yes to doing all this too. So anyway, so you think about what we do, and I want to just talk to you about how to teach your kids how to say no. So do you think about what parents say to kids? There's been a whole campaign out there for a number of years that says to kids things like, just say no. Saying to a child, just say no, is like saying to someone who's clinically depressed, just have a nice day. What's the question in the kid's mind? How? And unless you teach them how, you're not empowering your children, all right? And you think about what we tell them. Brenda's my girlfriend. We're juniors in high school, okay? Well, maybe we're not, but just kind of think about this. She could pass, but I can't. So Brenda comes up to me. It's Friday afternoon, and she says to me something like, hey, Clay, a group of our friends are going down by the river. They got a keg of beer. It's going to be a great party. What do we tell our kids to do in this situation? Just say no and walk away. Do you ever think about what that looks like? It looks like this. No, Brenda. Do you know any junior in high school who would do that to his girlfriend? No. Here's what I want you to understand. If you paint it in these terms for your kids, it won't work. If they think it's a choice between risking a friendship or risking a relationship or risking trouble, which will they do? They will risk trouble before they will risk the relationship. So when I teach kids this skill, I want them to know, I want you to keep your friends. It's really important. And if you learn this skill, you can keep your friends. All right? The second thing, think about what we tell our kids in this situation. Brenda says, it's a keg of beer, it's going to be a great party. I say, hey, Brenda, I'd really like to go, but it's Friday and my dog's been really sick. I don't know what's wrong with her. She's had some serious dental problems this year. What am I doing right now? Lying. Yeah, but that's not what we tell our kids to do in this situation. I've heard so many adults say to their kids, make an excuse and get out of it. What are you saying to your kids when you say make an excuse and get out of it? Lie to your friends. If I lied to Brenda on a regular basis, would you continue to be my girlfriend? No? Did it look like I had fun? See, I tell kids, here's what I want you to do. After one semester in my classroom in junior high, the kids said, you're against everything that's fun. And I thought, no, I'm not. I love to have a good time. And it really taught me that I needed to teach a little differently, okay? So, here's what I want you to talk to your kids about. I want you to have fun. I want you to keep your friends. And the last thing is, I want you to stay out of trouble, okay? When I was in the 9th grade, my dad and I bought a trail bike together. It was a Honda 90. We had an agreement. I wouldn't drive it on the street. It wasn't legal for me to do that. One Saturday, my parents were gone, and in 9th grade, I fell in love for the first time. Her name was Val. She lived 3 miles from my house. I got on the trail bike. I drove over to her house. I stayed longer than I should have, and now I'm hustling to get back home before my parents get home. It was raining, as it sometimes does in Seattle. The car stops quickly in front of me. I can't stop in time. I have to lay the bike over in order to avoid hitting this car. I got scraped up, but the bike hits the curb and it bends up the front fork and the front wheel. I can't drive it home now. I have to walk it home. I still remember the feeling. To this day, I remember the feeling in the pit of my stomach when I looked up the driveway to see my dad's car there. Anybody ever been there? Oh, yeah. It's no fun. So I want you to keep your friends. I want you to have fun. I want you to stay out of trouble, okay? So in order to teach your kids to do this, it looks like this. Brenda says, hey, Clay, a group of our friends are getting together. It's Friday night. And I say, what's happening? What are they going to do? She says, they got a keg of beer. They're going down by the river. I say, Brenda, that's really trouble for me. First of all, if the coach finds out, I get booted off the team. And I worked too hard to be a starter this year. And look, I just got my license, which means we got wheels. And there's an underage dance club in downtown San Jose. You like to dance, I like to dance. Some of our friends are going, you want to go?
Sure.
Then why are you standing? Come on. Now give Brenda a round of applause. She didn't know I was going to pick on her now, okay? That's a skill. It has steps. Here are the steps. The first step in the skill is teach your kids to ask questions. They know people who have a history of trouble. Your name is? Cindy. We're in 8th grade together, and Cindy comes up to me and says, Clay, you want to go to 7-Eleven right after school? And Cindy has a history of taking things from 7-Eleven without paying for them. I know I wasn't supposed to tell. So if Cindy says that, what would be a good question here? What are we going to do? Or, do you have any money, Cindy? And Cindy says, no, but slow Bob's working the counter. And I'll just keep him busy. He likes girls. I'll keep him busy. You go grab a 2-pound bag of M&Ms. We'll split them outside. Do I have to ask any more questions? Plain or peanut? Doesn't matter. It's still shoplifting, right? You need to teach your kids to ask questions, especially the kids who have a history of trouble, okay? The second step in this skill, if you want to teach your kids to say no, teach them to name the trouble. In this case, I said to Brenda, that's trouble. I could have said, Brenda, that's minor possession. I could have said, Brenda, that's DUI. Understand? It sounds different. It's the difference. If you're in a cocktail lounge this evening at 1:30 in the morning and the cocktail waitress comes up and says, last call for a DUI. Are you more or less inclined to? See, legal names, so I teach kids the legal names of legal troubles because it implies legal consequences. But when they get older, when they get high school age, they're not going to say to their friend, that's illegal. Or my mom would be upset with that. Here's what I want you to think about. For those of you who have teenagers, it's a higher level of moral development to get your kids to talk about inner trouble. Do you know what that sounds like? You know, we are in deep trouble as a society if the only reason kids say no to things is because my mom will be mad at me or I could get arrested. Here's where I want you to take them in this development. A higher level of moral development sounds like this. I wouldn't feel good about doing that. What am I going to say? Oh, yeah, you would? No, trust me, I wouldn't. And my dad would ground me. Do you understand the difference between that? That at some point in their life, it's not because you want them to say no. It's because they understand this is not okay. That's a higher level of moral development. Okay? So teach your kids to name the trouble. The next step is talk about consequences. If you remember what I said to Brenda, look, the coach had booed me off the team. I worked too hard to be a starter. I could lose my license, and we just got wheels, okay? By the way, parents, this is why it is so important that you spend time talking with your children about what the consequences are at your house for some of these things, both positive and negative, okay? So they can fill in the answer to this question. My mom would, and kill me is not the appropriate response. My mom wouldn't let me hang out with you anymore, and you're my best friend. You know my mom, okay? I'd be grounded. I wouldn't be able to use a car. Whatever it is, but you need to be really clear about what those consequences are. So the kids can fill in the blank here. And the next step is suggesting an alternative. And if you forget everything I'm telling you tonight, this is the most important step. If you understand, if you watch what I did with Brenda, I said, she's saying, hey, let's go drinking. And I'm saying, no, instead, there's an underage dance club in San Jose. You like to dance, I like to dance. And if you notice what I did when I was suggesting that alternative, I was physically moving away from her. Everybody see that? You teach your kids to suggest an alternative and move. Because now she was pressuring me to go drink, and all of a sudden, peer pressure shifts. If you forget everything else I'm telling you, peer pressure shifts when you suggest an alternative and physically start to move. Brenda was saying, let's go drinking. Who has to make a decision now? If I'm saying, hey, no, instead let's go dancing. Now the pressure shifts. Brenda has to now make a decision, okay? And if she cares about this relationship, it doesn't feel good to be left behind, even though she might want to go to the party more. Now we're moving in a different direction. And the last is to teach your kids, leave, but leave the door open. It sounds like this. If she said, no, I'm going to the party, My response would have been, if you change your mind, give me a call. I'm going to stick around till about 5, and if you don't call, I'm going to go do something with the guys. But I'd rather be with you. I got to go. This is hard for kids, but here's what I happen to believe. We are really good at telling children what to do. We're not very good at empowering them how to do it. You want your children you want to improve the odds that your kids make it? You better teach them to say no to their friends. Okay? And be able to model it in your own life. Now, I'm worried about time, so I'm going to shift the focus one more time. Questions, by the way, actually, stand up really quickly with the partner you had just before, really quickly, because I would be violating everything I believe if I don't have you do this. You can't teach your children the skill by telling them, here are the steps in the skill. And as much as some of you hate this part of it, when I say role play, some of you start to study your shoes. Oh God, I hate to do that. You know what? This is exactly what you have to do with your children. They can't learn it by just having you walk through the steps. You have to model it for them. Remember we talked about how important modeling is? So here's what I need you to do. Tallest person in this group of 2, you're the troublemaker. Shortest person in this group of 2, you're the skill user. Here's my first tip. Whoever is using the skill, position yourself so you can see the screen. This is your cheat sheet. I'll coach you. Now, so here's what I need you to do. Whoever is the tallest person in this group of 2, the troublemaker, tell them how old you are in just a moment, not in real life, but we're 12-year-olds, okay? And then, or we're 15, or whatever age you want to role play, and then pick a normal everyday trouble, not a heavy-duty trouble, really heavy-duty. But, you know, it might sound, your name again is? Ryan? Ron. So if Ron and I are role-playing, it might sound like this. Hey, Ron, we're 12-year-olds. Hey, Ron, let's go to the park right after school. Ron says, great. If he does step 1, make sure you don't make this 20 questions. I took some cigarettes out of my mom's purse. I know you've never smoked and I've never smoked. I thought we'd just try. Now, once I tell Ron what the trouble is, troublemakers, I want you to be quiet. And there's a tendency, and this is disturbing to me, that a lot of adults are really good at troublemaking. They're saying things like, don't be a wuss, don't be a chicken run, you never do anything with us. We won't get caught, you know. Don't do that. Just be quiet. Let them walk through the steps in the skill. Okay? I just want you to, this is like learning to drive for the first time. You don't do this out on the 101 at rush hour. You do it in the Kmart parking lot at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning or Saturday morning, got it? So don't put any pressure on them. Let them walk through the steps in the skill. Remember to move when you suggest an alternative. And as soon as you finish that first role play, I want you to flip-flop really quickly. So whoever was the troublemaker now has to be the skill user. I want you can use a different situation, but I want you to both practice just once, because I'm so frustrated when adults say, well, I tried this with my kids, or I gave them the steps. You have to model it. And if you can't model it successfully, they're not interested in looking stupid. They can do that without your help. You need to look pretty good if you want your kids to do this. So I want you to practice it just once, each of you. Everybody got it? Go. Now, I need a little feedback. How did it go? It went pretty well. This is pretty shaky. This is really hard to do. So I just need a little sense of how did it go. For some of you, most of you here, some of you here, a few of you here. This is like any other skill. It is not, for some of you, this is not the way you would do it and not the easiest way to do it in the beginning, and it takes some practice. But again, if you want your children to be able to say no, you need to be able to model for them what that looks like. And I think all too often we're great at telling them what to do. Just get along with your sister, just say no. The question in their mind is how. And if you're not answering the how, you're not empowering them. Now, here's what I thought we'd do. Let me just give you just a few examples of how to do this on a much larger scale in the community, because I know we have community agency folks who came for different reasons than parents may have come this evening. So the first thing, I want to make sure that people understand the power in this model for me is don't underestimate the power of having a common vision and a common language to move a community in a common direction. It's absolutely essential. It's really important that the YMCA, who I think is here this evening, I grew up as a Y kid, so I understand the YMCA from a very personal level, and I happen to believe the Y has always built assets for kids. You may not have used that language in the past, but I believe it's your word. And so it's really important. I'd love for the Y staff to say, not, I run after-school programs for kids, or I run summer camp programs for kids, but you say, I build assets for kids. I do it in after-school programs. And that Parks and Recreation staff would say, you know what? We build assets for kids, and we do it in summertime through a number of our programs that we do with the kids. And that if you're a second grade teacher in this room, when people ask you what you do, you say, I build assets for kids. I do it as a second grade teacher. Is this making sense to you? That we would have a common language and a common vision that says, I'm a minister and we build assets in our faith community with our kids. Okay? We need to have a common vision and a common language if you want your community to be a great place for kids to grow up in. Don't underestimate the power. So you got to get the language out there and you got to use it regularly. Okay? Let me just share with you again some examples from around the country, and then I'll give you organizational and community-wide. I visited St. Louis Park, Minnesota, which is one of the areas that has done, I think, some of the best work with this. They've been at it longer than anybody else. And in St. Louis Park, they went out and shared this message with 60 groups in 60 days that touched the lives of children. They said, we're trying to create a movement. We need to get the word out here. How did they do that? They formed speaker teams. They had 10 speaker teams made up of a young person and an adult working together. Actually, we did this in our community. We copied them because we thought this was such a great idea. And they trained these 10 speaker teams, each of them to do presentations. And each of these teams did 3 presentations a month for 2 months running. That's how they got 60 groups in 60 days. They made a list of every group in the community who touched kids, from Kiwanians to quilters, from church youth group leaders to soccer coaches. And they went out and presented this model. So we patented our community after that. So I got paired up. My co-trainer was Kelly Beamer, who was a high school basketball player, big star player at Bainbridge High School. And we would go out and speak. And one of the groups we spoke to were youth sports coaches in our community. And we talked about this. And you know, I can share the data, but Kelly was so much more powerful because the kids can share their perspective. And so the coaches said, oh, yeah, we do this. And Kelly said, well, some of you do and some of you don't. And they got a little defensive, and they said, like, give me an example. She said, having a coach swear at you is not an asset-building experience. Getting cut from the team. She said, I'm a good basketball player, but I got cut from soccer early on. That wasn't an asset-building experience. And the coaches began to hear it from, I think they heard it better from Kelly than they would have heard it from me. Does that make sense? You need to get this message out there far and wide, and you need to do it in a very systematic way. Okay? So the first thing I would say is half of your efforts and energy are going to be into sharing this message, and it will take, I thought we could do this in 6 months and we'd move on in our community. We've been at it for 3-4 years trying to keep the message out in front of folks. Okay? Variety of ways of doing that, from in local newspapers having an asset of the month and giving people ideas on how to do that with their children. In another community, we saw this on shopping bags. They printed the assets so that it was in front of people all the time. Realtors in New Richmond, Wisconsin would put, as they were selling homes, they'd say, if you want to move to this community, you need to know we're trying to create a movement here, and you will be asked to be a part of it, and we're trying to make this the best place in the country for young people to grow up and families to live. They saw it as a value-added thing. They loved it. Okay? So you need to get that message out there in front of folks in a variety of different ways. And then they come up with great ideas about how to do this. In St. Louis Park, Minnesota, let me just give you a couple examples. A woman at the senior center, when they presented this at the senior center, a woman at the senior center stands up and says, you know, our big project at the senior center is we adopt highways. We go out and pick up the trash along the highway. She said, you know what, our kids are more important than the trash. She came up with the idea of let's adopt bus stops. She organized the senior citizens in her community to adopt bus stops. They are there in the morning when children get on the bus to go to school. Their job is to know the kids by name and to know what they're good at and encourage them to do their best at school each day. She said, as senior citizens, we don't have a lot of money, but we do have time. She said, some of us are there in the afternoon when kids get off the bus to see how their day went and to encourage them to go home, do their homework, do the right thing. This lady gets it. Portland, Oregon, we presented to a PTA at Beaumont Middle School, and I came back 6 months later and I asked the group, what have you done and what have you learned? And the woman in the audience, her name is Nancy, she said, well, the last time you were here, You said, use your strengths to build assets with kids. She said, I tried to figure out what I'm good at. She said, I'm a good cook. So I started doing pancake breakfast on Friday morning before school. It started out with my son, who's an 8th grader, and 8 of his friends. She said, I have 9 boys every Friday at my house for pancakes before school. She said, most of what I've done in the past, my son thinks is lame. But he likes this because his friends like my pancakes. She said, I'm flipping pancakes and I'm involved in conversations I never dreamed I would be having with 8th grade boys. She said, I know more about my son and I know more about his friends. She said, I got 3 other moms to do this. On any given Friday morning, we have at least 25 kids at our houses collectively for pancakes. She said, I think we're building assets through pancakes. What do you think? Yeah. I did a workshop in Ripon a few years ago, and a guy comes up to me at break time and says, what are you, the CEO of Common Sense? And we both started laughing, and my comment was, it's common sense, it's just not common practice. What our research says is 40% of the adults who know what to do don't do it on a regular basis with children. See, your job, if you really want to create a movement in this community, is you got to narrow the knowing-doing gap. People know what to do, they don't do it on a regular basis. Okay? And again, you want to know how that starts? The movement starts with you. If you're modeling for your neighbors, if you're reaching out to kids, it's going to make a difference. Okay? Let me just give you a few other examples of other things that I have seen communities do. We visited Traverse City, Michigan, where in this community, young people give an award to every quarter to a business that's the asset-building business of the quarter. These are businesses that treat young people with dignity and respect. I was there when the Round Table Pizza franchise got the award, and the guy was great. The manager got up there in front of the kids, and he said, you don't know how hard we worked to get this award. We deliberately set out to get this award. We wanted this award hanging in our window because anybody who serves young people in this community wants this award. We went after it. Okay? We do things differently. There's so many different ways. There's not one way of doing this. There are thousands of ways of doing this. Okay? But I do believe it starts with you. And I think it's important to have groups working on different sectors. So what is the faith community going to do? What's law enforcement going to do? What's the city of Morgan Hill going to do? What's the school district going to do? And there needs to be some time where you get together on a fairly regular basis and target certain assets that you think are really important and develop an action plan and a strategy for making that happen, okay? Now, Search has a great website. They have a lot of examples online that you can go to, but I said we'd have you out of here in 2 minutes, and I lied because I'm going to take 5 more minutes, but we're going to have you out of here in 5 minutes. But if we want this to work, the movement starts with you. And let me just give you an example. I'm a volunteer in my own community, and here's what I learned. And my friends don't get this. When I'm home, you probably figured this out. I'm an avid cyclist. I do this stuff at 7 o'clock in the morning every morning when I'm home with a group of guys. We ride and we have oatmeal and then we go to work. And these guys don't understand. Where are you going this week? Morgan Hill, California. Why? They don't even know where Morgan Hill, California is, by the way. And I said, why? Because I'm a lucky guy to get to do this work. And you know why? Because the model changed me. Why do I like this work? Because I think, when I came across this, I think I was a pretty good guy I think I was a pretty decent classroom teacher. I think I was a pretty good dad. But I can tell you, I didn't do this very well in my own neighborhood. I didn't do it very well on the street. And here's where it struck me. I was doing a presentation just like this one several years ago in my community, and I asked parents that evening, do you know every kid in your neighborhood? Do you know them by name? Do you stop and talk with them when you see them on the street? Do you know what they're good at? Do you call them on things when they're doing things that are inappropriate? I asked parents that evening that question. I'm driving home feeling pretty good. You want it to go well in your own community? I won't see you guys again, so if it doesn't go well, I leave town and it's not a big deal. But if you're in your own community, you want it to go well. And I felt pretty good. The evening went well. I'm driving into my driveway, and I'd asked parents that evening, do you know every kid in your neighborhood? My headlights scan across the house next door. That was the moment of truth for me. Because the answer for me, and I'm not proud of saying this, was we had a new family that moved in the last few months. I knew the older boy and I hadn't met the younger boy. And I'm thinking to myself, what a hypocrite. You told everybody tonight they need to know the kids in their neighborhood. You don't know. So I made a note of that. That weekend I'm out in my yard. I'm working. They have a dog. We have a dog. And the dogs are getting to know each other because they've just moved in. I won't give you all the details. But they're running up and down this fence line because they can see each other through the fence and they're having such a good time. I'm laughing. And here's Brian, who's 14, who's my neighbor, who I haven't met. And I'm thinking, this is perfect timing. I walked over and I introduced myself. We talked for a second. He said, I got to go because I got to mow the lawn. Now, they've just moved in. Their lawn is heavy and thick. He's got a new power mower, but it's a push mower, and he cranks it up, and it goes about 10 feet, and it dies. It gets all clogged up with wet grass. So he has to turn it over, clean it out, cranks it up again, another 10 feet, it dies again. I'm watching this. He's going to be at this all day. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I could help him out here. We have a riding lawnmower, so I said, hey, Brian, if you help me get the grass catcher off this, we could get it in your backyard. We could knock this down really quickly. So he's helping me, and we get it in his backyard. Then I realized he's 14. What would he love to do? Drive this thing. So now I'm teaching a 14-year-old to drive with a clutch for the first time using my lawnmower. And what I can tell you is it was painful. The first thing I learned that morning is that a John Deere can do a wheel stand. You know that? If you crank the throttle up high enough and you pop the clutch quickly enough, you can get the front wheels off the ground, which he did several times. I don't think I saved him any time because it took him about a half hour to mow the lawn. An hour later, I look over and he's still driving. He's doing circle eights. He just wants to drive. So he brings my lawnmower back. He said, I want to pay you back. I said, what did you have in mind? He said, I'll mow your yard. I said, thanks, Brian, but I just mowed the lawn. I don't need you to do that. He's saying, what do you do for a living? And I'm trying to explain to him. He said, well, do you have a website? I said, no. He said, how come? I said, well, I'm technologically challenged. He said, I could build you one. So he said, let me see your computer set up. My office is in my home, so I take him into my office. He starts looking around. The first thing he says is, this stuff's really old. You need a new computer. I said, well, what would you recommend? He said, well, it depends on how you use your computer. Explain to me how you use your computer. I'm explaining to a 14-year-old how I use my computer. He doesn't say much. He just listens. He goes home. He comes back 2 days later. He's gone online. He's custom designed both a laptop and a desktop system for me. He said, he's printed it out in hard copy. He said, this is what you need to buy. This is Brian's recommendation. I want to tell you how much thought a 14-year-old put into this for me. He said, you travel a lot. It needs to be light. And there's much lighter versions out now because I've had this for about 5 years. But he said, it needs to be light. This weighs about 4.5 pounds. He said, a lot of laptops have a bigger screen, but you travel on airplanes. So when people lean their seat back on an airplane, it's really hard to use this. But if you have a smaller screen, you can use it on the plane. I mean, he put a lot of thought in this. He said, you have big hands. You need a full-size keyboard. This is almost full-size. When he got done explaining all the thought he put into this, I thought, you know what? I was going to upgrade anyway. Why not now? So I called the computer store. I have Julie on speakerphone from the computer store. I have Brian standing in my office, and I'm asking questions like, what's your return policy? My level of sophistication. He's asking questions like, what's the bus on this computer? And she didn't know what he's asking either. She said, can I put you on hold? I said, Brian, what's a bus? He said, you got this fast processor. It has to go through a highway to get up to your screen. That's the bus. If you got a fast processor and a narrow highway, you're paying for speed, you're not getting it all. She comes back on with numbers that mean absolutely nothing to me, and Brian goes, that's great. He coached me through the whole thing. When we got done, I said, how old do you think my computer consultant is here, Julie? She said, he's a 20-something techie from Microsoft, I can tell. And I had this 14-year-old just beaming in the corner of my office. I said, no, he's 14. He's my neighbor, and he is my consultant, okay? If you could have seen this young man when I first met him, he was this pretty inactive kid, a little overweight, and he spent most of his time in front of a computer. That summer he went on an outward bound experience. He lost a little weight, came back feeling good about himself. I bought a new road bike that year, and I said, hey, Brian, if you want to ride together, my old road bike's in the garage, we could ride together. We began riding together. Today, Brian has his own road bike. It's nicer than my road bike. He bought it with his computer consulting money, you know? Yeah, I'm paying him, but I just want to point out, none of this would have happened had I not taken 5 minutes over the back fence to find out what an incredible young man I have living next door. If you think tonight is about somebody else, the movement starts with you. So here's what I need you to do. It's going to take just a minute or two to do this. Brenda, can we have the plain Post-it notes? Are they around here somewhere? Everybody take 3 Post-it notes and pass them on really quickly. One more thing, because I don't want you to leave without, and then Wes has got a couple last minute things to say here. Here's what I want you to do. Pick one behavior that you'd like to do just a little better for the rest of this year with young people in your neighborhood, on the streets of Morgan Hill, at your church or synagogue. I don't know where you spend your time, but I want you to think about if tonight's going to make a difference. We're trying to create a movement in Morgan Hill. The movement starts with you. So here's what I need you to do. Everybody take 3 Post-it notes, and I want you to write one behavior that you are going to do a little differently as a result of coming here tonight. It might be, I'm going to make eye contact when I see teenagers on the street, and I'm going to say hello. It's as simple as that. Okay? It might be, I'm going to get to know the names of every kid in my neighborhood. It might be, I'm going to spend time with the kids that my kids hang around with a little bit more and be a little more deliberate in building assets with them. I don't care what it is. Write that one behavior you're going to do just a little better on the first Post-it note. Write it a second time on the second Post-it note. Write it one more time on the third Post-it note. When you get done, you have 3 Post-it notes. They all read the same thing. Everybody got it? Just one behavior. If everybody just can pick one thing you do just a little better, a little differently. I'm going to get to know the names of every kid in my neighborhood. Great. Okay? I don't care what it is, but it starts with you. What are you going to do differently as a result of coming here this evening? Okay? So the first thing I've learned is I'm more likely to change my behavior if I take that first Post-it note and put it someplace where I will see it in the first 5 minutes of my day and leave it up for at least a month. On the alarm clock at home, on the mirror in the bathroom, on the coffee maker in the kitchen. I don't know where you spend the first 5 minutes of your day, and I don't want to know. I don't need to know that. But you do know someplace you can put it where you're going to see it, and I need you to leave it up for a month. It takes time. The second thing I know about changing behavior is I need some constant reminders. So that's why I have 2 more Post-it notes. Put the second Post-it note somewhere where you will see it on the way to work and on the way home each day. On the dashboard of your car. When you leave here tonight. Okay? The third Post-it note, put it someplace where you will see it often. If you're a computer user, put it on your computer screen. If you text message all the time, wrap it around your cell phone. And again, I want you to leave it up for at least a month. Now you get the picture. You're going to see it first thing in the morning. You're going to see it multiple times during the day. It's more likely you'll do it. The last is, as you're leaving here this evening, I want you to publicly commit to somebody in this room what you're going to do. So if Ron and I were sitting next to each other, I might say, Ron, I'm going to do a better job with names with the kids in my community or in my neighborhood. And Ron would it's more likely you do it when you publicly commit to it. So commit, if you're here with a friend or a colleague or a spouse, I want you to publicly commit and ask for their support. Okay? Here's what I need you to do. Random acts of asset building, love languages, teach your kids the social skills they need. Share this message. If you think this was useful this evening, Search Institute gives you permission to make copies of their work and share it. I want you to share this with 3 people who are not here this evening. That's how movements get started in communities. And when they say, hey, this is good stuff, you thank you, and you say you're welcome. And what I need you to do is make 3 more copies and share it with 3 more people. We're trying to make Morgan Hill. I know this may sound a little sappy, but I happen to believe this is where we need to go with this. I think you ought to make Morgan Hill the best place in California, maybe the best place in the country for families to live and for young people to grow up. We ought to be shooting for something really exceptional here, not the run-of-the-mill. Okay? Thank you for coming this evening, and thank you for what you already do that builds assets for kids in this community. There's a lot of head nodders here this evening. For many of you, all I did was reinforce you're not crazy. You do know it makes a difference. I need you to be a little more deliberate and intentional in doing it. For the parents who are here this evening, thank you for coming, and thank you for doing what you do with your children. But try and do it not only with your kids, but with the children that they spend time with. All right? I'm going to give it to Wes, back to Wes. I'll stick around at the end if there are questions. Search has a great website if you want to go online and learn more about how to do this as a parent or as a community. But I think we've pushed the limits here, so I want to stop. Okay?
How about a round of applause for